Welcome to Mono Tutorials. In this session we will be having a quick look at the Cyberpunk vehicle planning stage. First we will look at planning the theme and style of the asset, then we'll go into story in order to bring life to your asset, before going into finding reference to pull our asset together. Let's jump in. As vehicles were the current theme for the Mono claim, I decided to run parallel with that myself and create a car of some sort. In the Web3 space it is best to have assets that are more plug and play. Having wheels on an asset increases the complexity of a development somewhat, depending on what engine you use, so I want a vehicle that doesn't require wheels, like a hover car. This would allow the asset to be used as a vehicle, but not require any extra functionality to make it work. The best theme for hover cars is of course the DeLorean from Back to the Future, but we can't use that for copyright reasons. We can certainly be inspired by it, however. So we need to move on to other inspirations such as Cyberpunk or Fifth Element. With that, I start compiling reference looking at the following things. So we looked at Cyberpunk, game, art, basically everything. The DeLorean, the future version, just for a little bit of inspiration there. The Fifth Element, which had some great flying, hovering vehicles, which turns out there weren't that many to work with in Google, so I had to unfortunately skip that one. I also looked into styles such as Borderlands, Cyberpunk itself, and I do like Valorant and Arcane, so kept those in the back of my mind as well. And then of course, actual cars. So I'm a big fan of supercars such as Lamborghini, McLaren, Ferrari, Audi, concept cars, and anything else I thought of as I went. I then started building a reference board of all this content. If I want my asset to work in basically all platforms including WebGL, mobile, and Standalone VR or XR, I need to keep the poly count as low as possible. Ideally, texture size should be as small as possible as well to keep the file size down. There are many approaches to this, and we can explore many of them if I have a high polygon asset to start with, either as an asset to bake down to a low polygon asset, or as reference for palette texturing. Next we look at story. A story or background can play a big part in bringing life to your creation, and that story can then unfold in the asset itself and the promotional material you create. I don't want just a car. I want a car that represents its driver. I want a vehicle that screams speed, wealth, or history. Of course, the other approach is a car that just looks cool. I think I will see if the reference I find speaks to me as I go. How you create your story is up to you. Pre-planned and build to that story, or come up with a story as you go along the development process. As always, there are pros and cons to both. So I find it a good idea to have a basic idea to start with, and then evolve or grow that story over its creation. In my case, I wanted a cyberpunk futuristic car that kind of looks beat up. Cars from the future that feel old is an interesting idea to me. Next up is the reference. Now this is what you've been watching for the whole time. I use a program called PureRef to start compiling all the resources I mentioned that grabbed my attention. I use Google Search, but you could also try some AI tools such as Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, or even Copilot and Firefly. I also keep in mind approaches to optimization that might be beneficial in order to save texture resources and time, such as mirroring the asset or using duplicate elements such as the thrusters. I'll go into more detail on these in a later time-lapse. I then reorganize my reference to focus on the key images and elements that I like. For me, having too many things to work with usually takes away from the result. The last thing I do is get a basic orthographic view of the type of car I want to use as a base. In this case, a 1966 Ford Shelby Mustang. You could of course draw your own reference with all of the detail you plan to have, or even a rough sketch to get you started, but in this case, I have enough reference and an idea of what I'm trying to do, and enough experience with the approaches to make it. So in this video we looked at a quick overview of the planning, story, and reference stages of creating an asset such as a cyberpunk car. In the next video we will look at creating the high polygon asset to use in our final asset. Thanks for watching, and happy building!